Greetings, Net Church. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Sarah Burke. I'm the Community Engagement Manager at Inspiritus here in Atlanta, Georgia. And I wanted to join you today to tell you a little bit about who is going to be benefiting from the kits that you're putting together, as well as take the opportunity to educate you on the difference between a refugee and our Afghans who came after the Afghan crisis last September under what we call APA, Afghan Placement Assistance Program. So I'm going to spend about 30 minutes just explaining to you the differences and what a refugee is, who a refugee is, and then also talking to you a little bit about who is going to benefit from the work that you're doing today. So thank you so much for being here. I will share my screen. So here at Inspiritus, we welcome refugees and immigrants from around the world. We do a few other things as well. We do disaster response and working with adults with disabilities and other things. But today we're going to focus solely on the work that we do with refugees and immigrants. There are 9 resettlement agencies that are operating in the Atlanta area, in the U.S. who have federal contracts with the federal government. Of those 9, 4 of them are here in the Atlanta area. So we have Inspiritus, IRC, International Rescue Committee, Catholic Charities, and New American Pathways, which I think that you may have worked with previously. We all do the same thing. We have some grants that allow us to have certain programs that maybe other organizations don't, but we work together collaboratively through 2 different co-ops, coalitions that we serve together in, and then also by sending some of our clients to other agencies who might have programs that we don't have, and vice versa. So I want to talk today first about the refugee program. So the refugee program, actually, you have to get a status. It's an immigration status. And of the refugees in the US, only less than 1% is resettled into a third country. What does that mean, third country? Well, in order to be a refugee, you have to have fled your home country, crossed an international border, and tried to resettle in a second country. There, you can apply for refugee status, and 28 countries in the U.S. do what's called third country resettlement, where they invite people who are generally in refugee camps, but are in that secondary country, who have qualified as a refugee to resettle in the third country. Resettlement is really for the most vulnerable refugees in the world: women and girls at risk, survivors of violence and torture, family reunification, people with severe medical needs, and children at risk. Here in the U.S., we have wonderful medical resources available to people. So the U.S. often focuses on refugees who are in this high medical need category because we know that we have a lot to offer them. But less than 1% of refugees are resettled into a third country. I think it's also important to note that the average stay in a refugee camp is 18 years. So this is a long process. It takes about 2 years to complete the process of becoming a refugee who is qualified to come to the U.S., but it's a long waiting process. Ideally, the time in which they're waiting, maybe the conflict that caused them to flee their home country would calm down and they could return to their home country, because that's the best case scenario. I think that you should know that refugees, they're not pursuing the American dream. They're not wanting to come to America. They were forced to flee their country, and they grieve the fact that they can't go home. So I also want you to know that you have to flee your country, cross an international border to qualify as a refugee, but because of persecution or fear of persecution. So in order to qualify as a refugee, you have to prove that you've been persecuted for one of 5 reasons: race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or social group, which is the social group is usually gender-based violence or homosexuality. So you have to prove that you've been persecuted or fear of persecution for one of those 5 reasons in order to qualify as a refugee. If you flee your country because of a natural disaster, or because your country economically couldn't sustain your life and you were not able to live there anymore because of that, you cannot qualify as a refugee. You can qualify as an externally displaced person, which is a whole different immigration status. If you flee your area, your state, your territory, because of persecution, but you don't cross an international border, you still cannot qualify as a refugee. So in order to be a refugee, you have to flee your home country, cross an international border and try to resettle in that second country because of persecution or fear of persecution, for one of the 5 reasons that I listed for persecution. So I want to go through all of that to explain that, because our Afghans are not they're not called refugees. They do not get the refugee status because it was a rescue effort to come in and rescue Afghans from Afghanistan. And then they were taken, some to other military bases around the world before brought to the US. But they did not themselves flee their country, cross the international border, apply for refugee status there. So there's a whole other program that's been created specifically to serve our Afghan allies. And it's called APA, Afghan Placement Assistance Program. First, let me just go ahead and finish talking about refugees. So you leave your home country because of persecution or fear of persecution. Then you register with the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. That's the UNHCR. They do a whole series of testing and screenings, security screenings, health screenings. They separate everyone in the family and interview them. Some of the clients have had to use the English word interrogate for that, to make sure that their story of persecution lines up, that there's no contradictory statements, and that they can prove that they qualify as a refugee. That process usually takes around 12 months. And then once they get refugee status, they can then apply to go to one of 28 countries. Oftentimes, it's not them saying what country they want to go to unless they already have family members there. It's more that the countries, each country decides on, each of the 28 countries decides on which countries they're going to provide relief to that next year. And so it's more like the US then would say, okay, we're, accepting this number of people from this country. They send people in, and it's kind of that, if you want it done right, do it yourself motto. The US believes that if you want it done right, you do it yourself. So they actually go through and do all of those screenings that UNHCR does over again themselves with their own employees. And then they do additional screening as well. So it takes about 18 months for someone after they've become a refugee to be qualified to come to the US. But the average stay in a refugee camp is 18 years. And less than 1% even make it to another country. So there's a lot of waiting. It's a long time of not even knowing if you're ever going to be, accepted into another country. But some people finally get the good news. You're coming to America. Welcome to America. They usually find out about a month before. We usually find out about 2 weeks before. So we don't have a lot of preparation time, and neither do they. Which I think is important to note, because people often are like, well, if you were coming to the US, why didn't you learn English? Well, there are 28 countries that do refugee resettlement. So they didn't know if they were going to go to Germany or Italy or France, like any of the other countries. They couldn't learn all the languages, right? And so they get about a month. They do some culture orientation there, UNHCR does, about the country that they're coming to, but it's pretty basic stuff. Anyway, so finally, welcome to the United States. I want to talk about what we do at Inspiritus from just before arrival until about 180 days after someone arrives. So this is actually the same. This is where it merges together, and our services are actually the same for our APAs and our refugees. I wanted to put this timeline in here, but I'm actually going to break it down and go through it more detailed a little bit further. But I just wanted to help you understand that we have a timeline that's been given to us. We have a certain list of required services that we are going to provide. We have a certain amount of time that we need to provide those within. So pre-arrival through their first 24 hours, we're securing ideally an apartment. Recently it's been an Airbnb, or temporary housing, because there's such a housing crisis right now. It's hard to find affordable housing for everyone that we're resettling. We set up their apartment with furniture donations. We go to the airport and pick them up. So for our refugees, we're literally one of the first faces they see here in the US. Welcome to America. For our Afghans, they've actually been on military bases in the US since around October. Waiting there for resettlement into community. So they have some adjustment to American culture a little bit in English exposure, but they've been in a holding pattern. And they've actually been segregated by gender. And some of our families have even been separated in different states. So the women and children in one state on a base and the men in another state. So when they're coming together here in Atlanta to be resettled, it is often a reunion. And it's really special to be a part of that. We're required to provide something we call the hot meal. I say hot meal because it's not always hot when they receive it, but the point is for them to have a meal that's been prepared. So we go to a local grocery store based on where they're coming from to pick up a meal for the family. The point of that is we don't want people who've been traveling for days coming from other countries, or even, our Afghans who are coming from, within the US to have to cook and prepare a meal hours after they arrive. They're exhausted. They're, sensory overload. This is all new to them. And so we want to make sure that they have food that they can just eat whenever they're ready. We do an orientation to show them, fire escape route, how to operate, cold and hot water, refrigerator, stove, toilet, shower. There's so many different ways to turn on a shower, things like that. And then the 24-hour visit is not 24 hours that we're there. It's 24 hours later. A case manager comes back. And they've had time to sleep, they've had time to eat, and maybe just mentally process a little bit. And then that is an opportunity for them to ask any questions that they need and us to talk about what it's going to look like now that they're here. I wanted to point out just how busy we've been. So I wanted to talk about who is going to benefit from the kits that you're putting together. I'll start with actually last year. If you look at last year, we received 108 total refugees in the entire year. Our fiscal year runs October 1st through September 30th. So you notice we resettled 11 Afghans last year. That was because the crisis happened in the middle of September. It took a little bit for us to start receiving Afghan families. They still actually had to go through medical screenings and security screenings and all of that, just to make sure that the U.S. wasn't receiving anyone who wanted to do harm to the U.S. And so that's why only 11 of them were able to make it through in the few weeks before our new fiscal year. But the point is, we had 119 people total for the entire year last year. And then this year, starting October 1st, we have received 354 Afghans through the APA program and 33 additional refugees, primarily from Sudan. So almost 400 people we have resettled since October 1st, when last year in the entire year, we resettled 119. So that kind of gives you a frame of reference for just how busy we've been. It's a wonderful busy. We are all so grateful for the work that we get to do and the people that we get to serve. We have increased our staffing as much as possible. We're also, in a staffing shortage here in the U.S. And so we actually have positions open. If you're looking for a job, just go to our website. We'd love to have you apply. But that just means that everyone who is working a lot. And it also means that these kits that you're putting together are really needed because we need these donations. We need these items for families. And it's a lot for us to buy and put together and all of that. So you're really doing that work for us. I talked to your leadership, prior to this, and we determined that all of the kits that you put together are going to go towards Afghan families that will be resettling. So thank you. All right, so let's get back to what we do here at Inspiritus. I'm sensitive to the time, so I'm going to kind of blow through this. If you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to me. My email address is sarah.burke@weinspirit.org. So Sarah, SARAH.BURKE @weinspirit.org. I'll mention at the bottom, at the end of this training too, but I just wanted to mention in case you have to leave or you have more questions, I wanted you to be able to write down my email address because I'd love to answer any questions you have because I know that I usually take like almost 2 hours to do this whole orientation and I'm trying to condense it down to 30 minutes because we need the work that you're doing. So we created a service plan, based on the family's needs, their physical health, their mental health, any housing issues that they may have. And extras are like, do they have family members here they're trying to get in contact with? Do they need a phone? Things like that. We do a cultural orientation where we're talking about things like hygiene, and body odor is typical in a lot of countries. It's not in the US. We talk about US laws. You can't drink until you're 21. You can't drive until you're 16 and have gotten a driver's license. We talk about how to handle your children in public. We don't want people disciplining their children culturally appropriate ways to their culture, but here in the US would not be. So it's a series of 4 classes that we do with interpreters to help people understand and adapt, or at least be exposed to the rules here in the US. We do enroll them in food stamps, what we call refugee Medicaid, which lasts for 9 months, and then we help them find jobs that'll allow them to enroll in benefits and have insurance through that. And then refugee cash assistance is their initial welcome money, and they do apply for Social Security cards. We make sure that their kids are enrolled in school. Like I said, we do job orientation. We do several budgets with them actually to help them understand what money they have, what things cost here in the US. We're enrolling them in ESL. We have a clothing closet that we take everyone to, teaching them how to use MARTA, things like that. So ideally in their first 6 to 8 months, they're moving from, just their first job that we've given them, and usually in some type of labor position or assembly line work, to economic self-sufficiency, hopefully starting to move towards a job more in line with their education, their experience, things like that. Hopefully they're adjusting to the culture and connecting with other people from their culture in their community. So the refugee cash assistance, I wanted to talk about what does that money cover? We're required to provide everyone a new bed and pillows. We're not allowed to get those donated. We do pay for their first month and a half rent out of that, and then ideally they're working, and that start working within a month and a half, so they can start paying it. We pay for their first month's water bill, Georgia Power deposit, and the food allowances. We're buying some groceries or taking them to the grocery store to buy food that they can use until their food stamps comes in. And then any household items that we don't have donated that we're required to put into their home, we have to buy, and so we have to spend their money on those items. So donations are really helpful. I have a list of items that we accept and items we don't. Unfortunately, because we're so busy right now, we're not able to go and pick up donations. It has to be brought to our warehouse in the Tucker area. But if you're interested in donating, you can contact me and I can share with you that information. Or you can go to the Welcome Co-op. I think it's welcomecoop.org. That's one of those cooperatives that I told you that all the agencies are working together on. And we work with them for setting up apartments and receiving donations. All right, so these are just services that Inspiritus programs that they're able to get enrolled in. I'm going to kind of blow through this, and can give you a time. You can't ask questions here on this since I'm not able to be there with you live, but I did list my. I realized I have a typo. I listed my email address there, but it's weinspirit.org. Sorry about that typo. So thank you again for being here today. We're so thankful for the work that you're doing. It is necessary. We cannot do what we're doing without people like you. And I know that sounds so cliche, but I've given you the numbers and I've showed you the work that we have to do. And I'm genuine when I say it's not possible for us to do on our own. We really need people like you. If you're interested in volunteering on an ongoing basis, you can email me, reach out. I'd love to talk to you about that as well. Thank you so much.